Small business war stories. Small businesses are the soul of America. And this is where they tell their stories. I am your host, Pablo Fuentes. Hey, lovers of small business and good stories in general. Welcome to episode 72 of Small Business War Stories. And today I sat down with Beau Hightower of Elite-OSM, and he does basically physical therapy and recovery work for the fighters at Jackson Wink MMA Academy in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And he also works with people in the community with rehabbing their injuries and doing all sorts of treatments. We talk a little bit about what it means to be a fighter, also the differences between treating, obviously, people who beat up their bodies literally for a living versus people who, may just have injuries that have, let's just say, more regular, quote-unquote, lives. So it was a really cool episode. He's got a lot of experience. He's seen a lot. We met when I was interviewing Jackson Wink MMA, and I really liked his story, and we sat down and recorded it. So that's episode 72 in Albuquerque, New Mexico. This episode is a part of the Soul of America 2 tour, and as such, it is brought to you by FreshBooks. And FreshBooks is small business accounting software that helps you keep track of all your finances on the back end so you can focus on the things that really make you successful. You need to be focusing on providing a service, on selling, on making your things, not necessarily. You have to make sure that things work on the back end, on the numbers, but that's probably not where you want to spend most of your time if you're going to be successful. So you can go and check out Small Business War Story. You tell them that you found them on Small Business War Stories. So go to freshbooks.com/war stories and enter Small Business War Stories and then get started. They calculated that you can save about 192 hours a year. So about 2 full working days per month by using FreshBooks. So I do encourage you to go check it out. It helps them, it helps you, it helps us. Everybody wins. And every episode of Small Business War Stories is brought to you by Proven. And Proven is a company I started. It is a small business hiring software tool, and it's used by thousands of businesses nationwide. You should definitely check it out. If you're a small business and you're hiring, this will help you organize all your hiring. You will be more successful. We also have a new guide about how to double your applicants. It's free, and you can find it at blog.proven.com. You'll see it right away. Right there, it's going to ask you for your email. It's going to send it to you, and you can check that out. It really, really works. We have lots of different resources at blog.proven.com for small businesses, including this podcast, but also lots of different articles about how to be successful with your small business. If you have any ideas, do send them over our way, podcast@proven.com. We look forward to hearing from you. Without further ado, let's get into episode 72 of Small Business War Stories with Dr. Beau Hightower at Elite-OSM in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And we are live here in beautiful Albuquerque, New Mexico. And this morning, I have the pleasure of sitting down with Dr. Beau Hightower, who is with Elite Orthotherapy, which is a facility that is within here at Jackson Wink MMA facility. And you have a really interesting business because you treat not only people who get injured training or maintenance type injuries or type work with fighters here, but also people that come from the community, from Albuquerque, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah, first off, great to have you in town. So yeah, one of the cool things about our business model is we work hand in hand with Jackson Wink MMA. So I am the medical director here, so we are a family, but we also have a separate and distinct business that we have tied to the gym over time, and that's really done a great job for us as far as media exposure, as far as reaching out to the community and them understanding that we work with the people that hurt themselves more than anybody else. Yep. Being MMA fighters, nobody puts their bodies through what they do. So if we can fix them, we have no problem fixing grandma that can't pick up her kids, or somebody that wants to play tennis on the weekend, or even a high school kid that wants to run track and field, and their doctor's saying, hey, listen, you've got to get shut down. You're not going to be able to finish your season. Well, we're going to probably step in, fix them, get them back out on the field, and get people doing what they love to do again.
Awesome. So how did you first get involved here? What was your background before, and how did this facility has grown quite a bit? How did you incorporate in here?
Yeah, so I've had practices in a lot of places over the years: San Antonio, Dallas, Cincinnati. I lived in Bogota, Colombia for about a year.
Cool.
I moved here at the end of 2012, and I basically just, I was broke. I used all the rest of my money from my previous job. I had about $1,000 in my bank account, so it was time to get to work. So I bought a used table for about $700. I bought a used, desktop computer. I had a buddy that owned a building. I got, rent for about $400 a month, and so it was just me by myself. I set up shop. Started just treating people at the local gym, so I would go out and do marketing with personal trainers, barbers, bartenders, people that influence a lot of people on a day-to-day basis, just to get my name out in the community. So that was one of the big ways that I started my business out, was really meeting people that are talking to people day to day.
That's really interesting because a lot of small business people who start businesses have that challenge initially. How do you acquire those first customers? And one of the things I think that people miss is that it's often good to do things that don't scale, right? So like speaking to people on a one-to-one basis to get things going. Eventually, at this point, you're probably not doing that as much, right? But can you talk about those early days and what that was like? Because I think people see somebody who's successful and they're like, oh, they're successful, of course, because they have all this, social media following and all this exposure. But it wasn't always that way.
Not at all. So, yeah, one of the things that I did, I would pick targets, usually about 5 targets or so, and I would just hit them repeatedly, 4 or 5 times a month. So I used to do that with medical practices in my previous practices. So I would get an urgent care, I would get a family practice, and I would make sure to show my face there 3, 4 times a month, but not dropping off business cards because that's pretty worthless. What we do, in my case, I would drop off lacrosse balls, and I would get the front desk staff and say, hey, listen, if you roll this against the wall, this will make your neck feel looser. Well, eventually you start to get referrals from them, so they say, I need to come see you. When you get them, then you start to get more of the mid-levels, and eventually you'll get the family doctor, and then you have the referral basis. So I just made sure to hit those targets. So like I found, actually one of the ways that I did this was I saw on social media the barber that cut a lot of these fighters out, and I just started going there all the time and spending money there and spending an hour in the chair talking to him and, getting to know him. And then from there, he brought Diego Sanchez down to the office. He said, I need to get, such and such in. And it starts to snowball. So then Greg Jackson came, and then Mike Winklejohn came. And so then eventually, when this facility opened, we had been treating so many of their fighters that they asked us to move in to the facility. So, getting out, getting people that are influential in the community. So like I said, for me, that's somebody that's a bartender, because they're going to have so many people that come through day to day, and they can just pass out my card or my wristband.
Yeah.
I don't do business cards anymore. I do wristbands, since we do all of our scheduling online. So
interesting.
Less likely to throw in the trash.
So you have you have a black wristband that has it's a rubber wristband, and it has your web address on it.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So instead of spending those dollars on business cards, which people tend to throw away, they'll wear it. And then if I'm at the gym or someplace and somebody's like, hey man, I know who you are. How do I book an appointment? I take it off, I hand it to them, I go right there, book it, and schedule it.
So it's like having your business card ready to go at any time.
Yep. And they'll wear it around, and they'll mark it for you, and they'll do the same thing. It's always on them instead of having to reach in their wallet if they have it on them.
Yeah.
So I found that to be a big benefit as far as spending money on marketing
Yeah,
materials.
no, it's great. And how long did that take from the first moment that you started doing this and you had just your, no money left in the bank and your table until you were in here within Jackson Wayne?
So that was about 2.5 years until we moved into this facility.
Okay.
So then, basically what I started to look for was people to do rehab for me. Eventually, we put them through the academic rigors, but the first thing I wanted to look for was people that were people. I can teach people how to treat. I can't teach them how to have, emotional EQ or how to get along with people.
Like bedside manner,
yeah,
if
absolutely.
you will.
So I actually hired somebody who was a front desk person at one of the gyms to come do my rehab. And then we started kind of working their way through school. Okay. Now they're getting their doctorate in naturopathic medicine, and they're one of my clinicians.
Cool.
And so, I tried to hire people that, one, were sociable, were in touch with the community too, but people that could just get along with people that were friendly.
Yep.
And that's sometimes mutually exclusive from the medical profession.
Interesting.
So instead of taking somebody that was qualified already, I said, let's find somebody that's a really good person, a good fit, and then we'll make them qualified.
Okay. Cool. So let's talk a little bit about what sports medicine in this sense really means, right? So what's your training and your background in, and how has that evolved over the years, and what are the most common types of treatments that you administer?
Okay, so I've got 2 doctorate degrees, one in naturopathic medicine, which are connective tissue specialists. So we treat ligaments and fascia and muscles. So it would be like if you took a massage therapist and you gave them 4 years of a doctoral training. Okay. That's kind of what naturopaths are. So they're under the medical board, licensed by the same board that the medical doctors are licensed by. So it's a very rigorous process. I also have a doctorate degree in chiropractic medicine. So getting different lenses to look through things allows you to evaluate a patient through different lenses and say, hey, maybe this treatment may not work for this patient, and kind of peel back the layers from there. So most of what we do here is deep tissue work. So we have a really, really specific form of manual therapy. Some of that involves bone setting. Most of it involves treating connective tissue.
It's like microfascia release and stuff like that.
Yeah, breaking up
that
adhesions.
Stuff's painful.
Yeah, it's painful, but it's very effective.
Yeah.
So we resolve about 95% of the injuries that come through our doors with about 4.2 average as far as the amount of treatments they need.
Interesting. That's pretty low.
Yeah, as opposed to 3 times a week for life for chiropractic, or 15, 20 visits of physical therapy. And we recognize that if we don't get those changed in the first 1 or 2 visits, it's probably not going to change on 4, 5, or 6. So we refer them where we need to refer them. But it makes a big difference because people aren't spending the same amount of money, and they're looking for instantaneous results. We live in a instantaneous results society. So people used to be able to close the box on their computer. They don't want to buy in. But what we do want to do is teach people how to take care of themselves and teach them how to be autonomous. So we will give them a home exercise program that looks very similar to what we found on their bodies in the office.
Okay. How is the relationship and the treatment that you have with people that come from off the street similar or different than it is from people who are, because we're here in an enormous facility that's Jackson Wink. I just got a full tour, and there are dorms. I mean, this is basically like a college of fighting in here. And you have your facility within here. How is that similar or different dealing with people who are in the fight game versus people who come off the street?
So we also function as sort of a training room like a college would have. So we have compression boots, we have ultrasound, hot packs, cold packs, decompression machines, lasers, ultrasound, everything that you would expect a high-level Division I athlete or an NFL athlete to have. We use it on our patients, but any of the fighters can use that equipment anytime they want to.
Okay.
So the differences between the types of injuries, for one, this seems counterintuitive, but we're more careful with the fighter's body than we are with the average person. So we can, if you say you're treating a Holly Holm or John Jones, and you go a little too hard on something and you end up actually injuring them, your career is basically over at that point. You're costing them $3 million, $4 million, $5 million. So,
that's it.
Yeah, just a little bit. So if I irritate, Joe Schmo on the street, all I have to do is comp his visit and say, hey, we'll work on something else next time.
Yeah.
So we, and we try to tailor each one because people come from all over the world, particularly from the fight gym. So sometimes that means that we don't give them the treatment we normally would give somebody else. If they know they respond well to a particular treatment, like we don't do a whole lot of popping joints in our office, but we can. So if we have a fighter that, is from France or something and he sees an osteopath all the time and that's what they want, then that's what we give them. If they know their body responds well to something, we're not going to force something else on them.
Okay.
Alistair Overeem, for example, he likes this hammer therapy, so we do that to him.
What is that?
Basically, what you use is a hammer and a chisel, and you basically move bones that way. So
bones with a hammer and a chisel.
Yep. So it's a very specific way.
Really?
Yeah, you'd have to see it to believe it. It works really, really well. So yeah, we use that, when needed as well. So he also likes deep tissue work, so we do some of that. But, we basically try to tailor, it could be dry needling. It could be...
What is dry needling?
Basically, you take these big filiform needles. They're like acupuncture needles, and you put them into the muscle belly itself, and it turns the muscle off from the inside out. Sometimes you add electricity to it as well if you need to.
Okay.
But what we want is the biggest arsenal of tools that we can have. Now, the average person, we're going to treat them kind of our standard protocol. If you have lower back pain, we're going to address fasciitis, give you strengthening exercises. More people are going to be weak off the streets as opposed to these fighters. They don't have weak cores.
Yeah, no, no, they don't.
So that's a different animal.
Do you train as well?
I do some wrestling, but that's about it.
Okay.
But yeah, they don't have weak cores or anything like that. So that we have to change the way we address them. So we're not giving them a bunch of core strengthening exercises like I would to a grandma. So, and that they have a lot more acute injuries. So cartilage tears in the ribs and finger dislocations and
those are tough. Ribs. I've been training jiu-jitsu, I'm an amateur, but for 6 years, and ribs, you just can't do anything.
Right. Usually takes 5 to 6 weeks to calcify.
Yeah, you just got to sit.
Yeah, so we've been able to speed up a process to about a week and a half to 2 weeks that we have to get somebody out. So
how do you do it?
We align the ribs, and then we'll have somebody come in and do a prolotherapy shot on it. So it creates inflammation in the cartilage between it, and then it basically calcifies quicker, so it's not unstable anymore.
Okay.
Because particularly the lower ribs, when you tear the cartilage, they'll slide.
Yeah.
And then the nerve gets caught in there.
I have like a memory of that pain, and it's like, and you just can't move.
You can't get comfortable if you sneeze or cough or anything.
Sleeping's hard.
Yeah, you try to sit up, it's like somebody stabbing you. It's a difficult injury. But the cool thing is we see it so often here that we're really good at fixing it. So when it comes in from the real world, no regular doctor has any idea what to do with that because they don't ever see it.
Yeah.
But we have answers because we get this population of patients here in the gym. And particularly, and this is going to sound maybe kind of bad, but when we get people from, Mongolia or places like that. They're already used to kind of crazy treatments, so we can experiment and try some new things on them.
Yeah.
Without them being so concerned about it.
What are some examples of that?
Different times of joint manipulation.
Okay.
Needling areas that we normally wouldn't do. And we also have a different time frame for fighters too. Like we had a fighter tear his hamstring about 2 weeks ago. He's 5 weeks out from his fight. He's actually good now.
Yeah.
He's back to training full. His high kick's still a little shy, but we're working on it.
Yeah.
But we have basically a 2.5 week window to decide if we're going to pull him from the fight or if he's going to be good to go.
So you participate in those conversations?
Yeah.
Okay.
100%. And so like Coach Wink and Coach Greg will come to me and they'll say, what do you think about XYZ? And then we talk to the fighter and they have to decide, do they feel compromised enough to where they still want to fight? Or is this going to make them take a step back in their career where they fall down the rankings, or do they need the paycheck? And you'll see varying levels of that throughout different fighters. Like Cowboy Cerrone's, for example, he wants the money. Like he doesn't care what's hurt on him or whatever else. He's not going to get an MRI. So that being said, we can't say pull out of the fight because he's not going to listen to us anyway. So we just need to work around that and give him the best possible chance of competing.
He'll fight anybody. He'll fight like next week somebody who outweighs him about 30 pounds.
For sure. He just doesn't care. He wants to go make money. He wants to fight, and that's it.
Yeah.
There are other fighters that we are a little more careful with the trajectory of their career or,
So we're currently sitting here, I didn't mention this, but in Greg Jackson's office, and this is the war room. You can have a view of the training floor, and you have like the video facility. So is this where you guys sit around here and make those decisions?
Yeah. This is where a lot of the film study is done by Brandon Gibson, Greg Jackson, all the coaches here, Coach Winklejohn. So sometimes I'll sit on it as well, mostly just when there's an injury going on. But yeah, we sat here before John's last fight and watch film, and you get the ancillary figures in the back, which is me, and I know my role in the office. I don't make decisions. I'm an advisor, and I think it's important that people realize that they start to get a little big for their britches, and they start feeling like they make decisions. But no, the coaches make the decisions.
Right.
So we don't have any misgivings about what our role is. It's here's the information.
Yeah, but that's interesting. What's interesting about that is like that power, your power, grows as you don't try to use it, right? So if you don't try to use it and you're there as a trusted source of advice, then the respect that other people have for you grows, right, which in turn feeds itself, right? I think oftentimes, especially like this happens a lot in business dynamics, as people try to exercise their power so much, and power is the only authority is the only muscle that you don't really need to exercise for it to get stronger, and it often can have the opposite effect.
Right, and in this particular case, you're dealing with lots of alphas who are very wary of their position because a lot of them are paid by the fighters, and so they can be somewhat territorial as well.
Okay.
Just as the fighters can be territorial over the coaches. They don't want the coaches helping other people because it could potentially cost them money as well. So we're always trying to find that sweet spot to where we're giving the right amount of advice, but we're also not just standing on the sidelines and letting things happen that shouldn't happen.
Okay.
So it's always,
What's an example of that?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes a fighter will not tell people what's going on, or they'll ask me to not tell the coaches.
Oh,
what's going on?
Because they need the money?
Right, because they need the money, usually.
Okay.
That's the case. But at the end of the day, like...
And by the way, that shouldn't be minimized. It's very, very difficult to make a living in mixed martial arts.
Right.
You train your ass off, make very little money, and a lot of them have families, and they're sacrificing a lot to do this. So.
And some working other jobs, and so when they finally get to not work other jobs, and somebody just pulls them from the fight without their input, that's a problem.
Right.
But we also have to look out for their long-term career goals, health goals, and all those other things. As a clinician, I'm trying to find a balance of those. I'm more aggressive than most other clinicians out there because I understand what they're going through.
Yeah.
I understand that if they don't get paid, how are their bills going to get paid? Whereas if you're just Joe Schmo at the orthopedic surgeon's office, if you see something dangerous, you go, no, you're out. So there's a balance again that we have to find to where we're not putting them at risk of being knocked out, or more of a risk of being knocked out, I guess.
Yeah.
Or losing and really hurting their career, but still being able to make, because this is how they make a living. If I'm hurt, I can still show up and make a living. If you're hurt, you can still show up and make a living. These guys, if they're hurt, they're out.
Yeah. There's a controversy around, speaking of injuries and like MMA in general, about whether or not you should use gloves, right? You currently use gloves, but there are proponents of not using gloves because then they think that it's actually pretty easy to break your hand hitting somebody, so you would hit less hard and you have fewer traumatic, concussion type injuries and things like that. What's your take on that? What have you seen?
Yeah, I mean, fighting itself is inherently dangerous. So,
sure.
So people will talk about needling and stuff. I'm like, oh, that's dangerous, like locking yourself in a cage and fighting another human.
Yeah, that's also been trained to basically kill you.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's where's the line? I'm not really sure. So yes, the smaller gloves do cause you to break your hands easier. And one thing we've seen in particular is females break their hands much more than males. Our skulls are roughly the same size, but the hand difference and bone density and size is much different between men and women.
Okay.
So women tend to break their hands a lot more on other women's heads because they don't have the same knockout power in their hands. They do in their legs, but they tend to break their hands a lot on people's heads. So I don't know. The one thing that I don't like about the MMA gloves is how sharp they are. The leather itself, it cuts people really badly.
Right.
And, with the fingers being able to extend completely, it leaves the eyes vulnerable.
For pokes and stuff.
Yeah, so I would like to see them maybe curve down a little bit to where it's harder to extend your fingers all the way. But how do you do that and still be able to grapple and hold on to things? It's a tricky sport. I think the original design is pretty good for all things considered.
Yeah.
But maybe what they need to do is just add more padding on it and curve the fingers down a little bit. I think that would go a long way.
But you're not a proponent of getting rid of gloves, because getting rid of gloves sounds like it's worse, but it actually could be better, right? Because it would encourage. It would change the game.
I don't think the fans would like it.
Okay.
That's been done in the past. You end up with a lot of palm fighting and stuff like that, and humans like to see punches.
Yeah.
When this is still a
business. It is a fight game.
It's a show business, right? Like, it's not show friends, it's show business. So you have to be able to put a product out there that is, and they're trying to find the sweet spot. Is this a mainstream marketable product, or is this a street fight?
Right.
And how do we make this more similar to other professional sports, even though it's not?
Right. How have you seen that change? How long have you been around the fight game?
About 7 or 8 years.
Okay, so even 7 or 8 years has changed quite a bit.
Yeah, it's changed quite a bit. There wasn't a bantamweight or a flyweight division back then. There was no women in the UFC.
Yeah.
So it's changed in some aspects. I mean, now that we've seen the weight cut, things change. So now they're weighing in the day before instead of the morning before instead of the I guess it's maybe 12 to, I can't remember exactly how far apart it is, but it's a different time than they used to weigh in, which they've taken away IVs.
I mean, you could still, I've never competed in MMA, but I've done Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournaments.
Right.
And those are scale to mat. Like, you basically have like 5 minutes before you fight.
Right.
Do you think that would reduce injuries for weight cutting and things like that?
I don't. I think people will go out there dehydrated and put themselves more at risk of getting knocked out. And we'll see more cardiovascular incidents and things like that because they're always going to try to, when there's money in the line, they're always going to try to take advantage of the situation.
It's game system.
In my opinion, one of the best things that you could do is just penalize the fighters significantly more. And I think California is actually making some good steps by weighing them and not allowing them to cut a certain percentage out of their walking around weight. I think they have to do 10%
there's
before.
Like a delta between what you weigh in and what you step on the cage.
So they're not letting people cut a certain percentage of their weight. You can't cut 20 pounds of water the night before like you can in Vegas per se.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good start. But it's not as simple as adding more weight classes. It's not as simple as saying weigh in, right before the fight, because inherently when there's money involved, it's going to make people do ridiculous things.
Yeah. So speaking of that, that's a great segue into talking about steroids and performance-enhancing drugs. When you're talking about a business that's gotten so big, and there's so much at stake, and people's like not only their livelihood, but in some cases like their entire families and many generations' livelihoods afterwards, if they're not stupid with their money.
Sure.
How do you assess, what's going on with that in the world of mixed martial arts?
Yeah, it's not something we deal with at all. Like, we don't ever ask what people are taking or anything like that. It's but if you look at, again, it's a money-making endeavor. If you look at Lance Armstrong or Barry Bonds or whoever else, like, if you're going to tell somebody, might take 5 years off your life, but you can make 10 times the amount of money, 20 times the amount of money for your family, there's a lot of people that are going to take that.
Yeah. It's actually in the dorms here, there's a thing that says I'd rather live 30 years of a fight than 100 years hidden in a couch or something like that.
Right. So that's, it's a warrior mentality, right? So yeah, I'm not really sure. There's no empirical evidence that says that somehow fighters are safer, not on performance enhancing. It's like there's less knockouts now.
Yeah.
It's not like people are getting submitted less or anything like that. So, in fact, I would actually argue since the TRT ban went away, there's more pullouts from fights due to injuries because they can't recover as well. And I would say the same thing with knockouts even. If you're on testosterone or some PED, it's going to make your neck muscles and your jaw muscles stronger too, so you don't have as much recoil. And I think, anecdotally, we've kind of seen that with some fighters that had really iron chins before this ban went into effect, and then afterwards they're
I'm not going to say their names, but I can think of a couple.
There's a few, for sure.
Yeah.
And the sport itself kind of runs this hypocritical pathway because for a while you were literally getting TRT exemptions where you could be on testosterone, which is the steroid, from your doctor. So some of them were and some of them won't. So I mean, I don't really know where the cutoff is, but
Okay.
I do know that USADA is probably the worst business idea the UFC's ever come up with. They're paying, I don't know how many millions of dollars to pay for this, and then it costs them events every time they lose a fighter for years, particularly money-making fighters.
Yeah.
So
USADA is a business that's funded by the UFC?
yeah, they pay USADA. So,
Okay.
and the fighters didn't get collective bargaining on that. They didn't get to be involved in the discussion of how that would go. It was just like, oh, here you are. We're going to track you 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
As an independent contractor,
Yeah.
you have to report where you are at all times.
Because somebody can ask you to basically take a urine sample
Anytime.
at any point.
Anytime.
I mean, you could be out at a restaurant.
Yep. They can show up anywhere, and you're required, if you want to not be suspended by them, to comply.
Okay.
So they're basically they're paying part of their purse to be stocked at all times. So in the NFL and Major League Baseball, they've been able to collectively bargain drug testing, but it's kind of managed from the inside. But they at least have some say in it, and that's where having a fighters union comes into play instead of just having something shoved upon you without you having any kind of discussion about it whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I'm not a proponent of PEDs. Like obviously, it's a big taboo in our society.
Yeah.
It's illegal.
Yeah.
Literally illegal.
And also, it can lead to like things like joint injuries, tendon injuries, and a lot of things like that because the muscles get stronger faster than the tendons do, right?
Yeah, and it can. And you're already talking about people that may have a predisposition for things like domestic violence or issues like that. Now we start adding hormone cocktails to it. I mean, I don't think it's hard to draw the line of correlation between those two things. It doesn't make people more stable when they start messing with hormones in their body. So there's a lot of societal consequences that can go hand in hand with that. But as far as performance enhancing, I mean, if you're fighting, if you're getting tested, in season or whatever, I think that makes sense.
Okay.
But testing somebody all year long, all the time, and then again, it could be all these random substances, and a lot of these substances don't really have a gold standard.
Right.
Like if you've seen that movie Icarus.
I have not.
So it's about a Russian scientist. He's actually the one that came up with this test for a steroid called Turinabol or T-ball. That several Major League Baseball
Which is the one
players,
that John Jones got accused of taking.
and Frank Mir and several Major League Baseball players. This one baseball player tested 5 times positive for it over the course of a year and a half, even while he was suspended for the original one. And his argument was like, why would I be taking this when my career is on the line? I'm suspended for this substance. Why would I be taking it?
Yeah.
And so because there isn't a gold standard for this test, there's no way to really know what metabolites this could come from also. Like, is somebody genetically creating this out of something? Could it be in some other form of supplement? And there are at least 7 or 8 supplements that we have found already that have turinabol in them.
Really?
But those are only reported after the the FDA looks into it. So if it doesn't ever show up or get caught or have any reason to look at it, you can probably imagine that the number of supplements that actually have these steroids are much higher than that.
Yeah.
The FDA doesn't have to, the supplement companies don't have to prove that it's safe. It's up for the FDA to prove that they're not safe, but they can't just go to every mom and pop shop and test everything they have.
Yeah.
So
now, but talking about like the business of fighting and like how that's growing, like I think, how do you see this over the next 10 years evolving and like the medical side of it evolving with the business such that there is safety, such that there is trust, and we continue to get away from, to quote Senator McCain back when he said that this was human cockfighting, which is not that long ago. He said that, I want to say 1994.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's, or early 90s, something like that. So we're less than 15 years after that.
Sure.
So, and we are so far away from those days now. During this trip in Bozeman, Montana, I interviewed a regional MMA promotion, and just talking to them about how the fight game, how much safer it is, but there's still a lot of promotions who do have wacky rules and like unsafe behaviors. How do you see this evolving over the next 10 years such that more people like yourself can be part of this, positive, constructive ecosystem of successful fighters?
I think one thing that's really important, and the UFC Performance Institute is doing this as well, is every major gym should have some healthcare providers, quality healthcare providers there. Now, they can't all afford it necessarily. We have a different situation where they're not paying us directly, so it's kind of a agreed upon family situation. But
what do you mean by that?
So, like, we don't work for the gym, right?
Okay.
So they're not paying us to be here. We've agreed upon terms to where we can use our business to basically piggyback off of their business, but we're also here for their fighters in that way.
Right.
I think most people just imagine that you would just work for the gym and they would have to pay you $60,000, $70,000 a year to work for that gym, but these gyms can't afford that.
Right.
So they have to be able to form those kind of relationships with people to where they, sublease space from them, or they have a neighbor or somebody next door that can help look at all their fighters.
So that's why your real moneymaker is people from the community that come in.
100%.
Okay.
I mean, 99.9% of the revenue we bring in is just from regular people in our community, from
Okay.
word of mouth, through social media marketing. That's where our money comes from. And we do well. We're gross probably close to $1 million this year.
Congratulations.
Cash only, so we don't do any insurance at all. It's private pay.
Yeah.
So people have to be invested in the process. It's going to be $75 for an hour. So people aren't going to come spend that money unless they actually want to get better.
Yep.
And they're going to invest in that process, which is important to us.
Compliance.
Too. Yeah. If it's free, who cares, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's really important that people have access to those resources as far as a fight game. That's crucial to have somebody around that's a problem solver.
Camps or all gyms have something like you?
No, not even close.
Okay.
Some have, maybe a local surgeon they talk to, but I mean, you can look at the example of some other gyms and their pullout rates. There's a gym in California. They must have an orthopedic surgeon they work with that pulls them all from fights because their pullout rate is so much higher than everybody else. And everybody attributes that to their sparring, but I don't see how that could possibly be the case.
I think I know who you're talking about.
So in that case, there must be somebody there that doesn't really understand the body or the fight game or able to work with them conservatively. And so they just pull the trigger on everybody, and it ends up costing them money. It costs the UFC money. And then they end up having some invasive surgery that maybe they didn't need, and that puts them out even longer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think from that team, like 3 or 4 of them have had back surgery.
So you think having some sort of a standard would be important, or some sort of like well, maybe standard is the wrong word, but
maybe like an association of fight doctors or something like that, where they can meet annually and go over best practices for MMA.
That doesn't exist right now.
It doesn't exist right now.
Did it exist for boxing?
There is a commission of fight doctors for boxing, but they're more just medical physicians that evaluate the health for somebody to be able to box. It's not necessarily evaluating their injuries or things like that.
Okay, got it. So in terms of building forward, so you think having some sort of association would be useful, standards, medical standards and things like that? Because the other thing that happens is you have, like, obviously the UFC is the biggest show in town.
Sure.
But you have a ton of regional, smaller promotions, which is basically how people work their way up. I was interviewing Michael, who runs, the general manager of this facility, and he was talking about how people submit their fight videos and basically apply to be a part of Jackson Wink.
Right.
In order to do that, you have to have trained somewhere else, and you have to, had come up through the ranks and fought in regional promotions. Do you think there's any sort of value in like unifying standards for all those promotions?
Yeah, I mean that would be a good place to start again, but I don't know how you can do that because state boards are different from every state to every state. They have different licensing requirements.
Yeah.
That's the notion of states, right? So I'm not sure that's really possible. That would be great to think about, but again, the financing isn't there for the amount of medicals that are necessary for a lower level promotion. The UFC, the New York State Commission, the California State Commission, they can request EKGs, even though the fighters have to pay for them themselves, which is kind of a problem.
Wow.
The UFC should
That's
probably
expensive.
be footing that bill. Yeah. They have to pay for all their medicals on their own for the most part. Just like they'll only pay for maybe, 1 or 2 coaches depending on where the trip is as far as their flights.
Oh, the UFC pays
Right.
for 1 or 2 coaches.
And then the fighters have to incur the rest of those fees.
Yeah, because their corner consists of probably 4 or 5 people.
Right. So they get things paid for them when they've been injured in a fight, but not necessarily out of that. And that's why they need health insurance, but they can't have it because they're independent contractors. So they have to basically...
And if you're an MMA fighter buying your own health insurance...
Yeah, they can't do it.
Yeah.
They don't get, subsidized or anything like that. So unfortunately, this is what you'll see a lot of times is somebody will have an injury going into the fight, and then they'll say that they got injured in the fight so they can have a procedure done so that the UFC's insurance will pay for it.
Ooh.
So they will hide an injury for 2 to 3 months just so they can get a procedure done because, they can't afford it otherwise.
That's a really odd set of perverse incentives.
Right.
How do you avoid that?
I don't know. One of the big ways to avoid that would be, if you're a $4 billion company, you should probably be able to give your people health insurance. And
How many fighters in the roster right now?
I'm not sure how many there are, but
it's hundreds.
It can't, for the amount of revenue they make, and their money's made directly off fighters. You don't make money. I know they've tried to brand themselves as being the reason why people watch, and they may have actually succeeded at this point. But at the end of the day, if the fighters strike, you have no product. But unfortunately, without unionizing, without being able to have a collective voice, which is very difficult to do in an individual sport, you're never going to have a voice.
That's tough.
Yep.
What would you say is the number one lesson that you've learned in your time as a small business, that for people who are thinking about starting their own thing?
Yeah, number one is to make sure you start lean. I think a lot of my contemporaries want to make their office look really nice and fancy right off the bat, and they go into debt and they basically incur overhead costs that are just not sustainable.
Okay.
And that leads to either unethical business practices to be able to pay the bills off, or you end up running in the red too far. One of the things that made us very successful is we stay, and we still do this to this day, is stay as lean as possible no matter what.
Okay.
We don't pay for a front desk person. We don't have an office manager. So we try to centralize as many of those processes as we possibly can, so we're not incurring those costs, which allows me to pay my people more because they're not taking their percentage and paying for another salary that they don't necessarily need.
Sure.
So the big thing there was to stay lean and just, be aware of your costs as you go in and think about, as you're building your business from the ground up, you're building your brand. Your brand is what's going to carry you. It's not that your front desk looks nice or it's made out of fancy stone or you have the best location in town. At some point, you may be able to actually afford that location.
Right.
But that cost has to come from somewhere. Either that's your pocket or you have to pass that on to your consumer.
Right.
Which, if you're a new name in town, passing a high cost on your consumer until you built your brand is not really a good idea.
That makes sense. Where can people find you? So if they wanted to come get treated, or do you have a social media presence at all with this?
Yeah.
So what do you do?
So you can find me on Instagram. It's Dr. Beau Hightower. Same thing with Twitter. And you can find us
Beau,
like the French version.
Yep.
Beau.
Yep.
And then elite-osm.com is our website. So we do all of our scheduling through there. Paperwork there. Everything is there.
Do people come from out of town or mostly in the Albuquerque area?
Yeah, we have people flying from all over the world.
Okay.
Yeah.
To get their microfascia worked on.
Yep.
Man, that stuff hurts.
Because they've been going to all these clinicians and not getting results. So
that's good. Thank you so much for sitting down with me and sharing your story.
Yeah,
I really appreciate it.
Hopefully it was a little bit interesting.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Small Business War Stories. If you enjoy the show, share it with a friend, or you can subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or on our blog at blog.proven.com. If you have an idea for us, we'd love to hear it. Please email us at podcast@proven.com. See you next time. Small Business War Stories. Small businesses are the soul of America. And this is where they tell their stories. I am your host, Pablo Fuentes.